So let's just hop right into the interview. And hello, Ian. I'm so happy to have you, and I'm glad you could finally make it.
Yeah, everybody who's still here, sorry for the delay there.
Awesome. Well, Ian Joyner is going to be, he's one of our instructors and advisors for the Character Arts program for the 3D side that we have. So, Ian, go ahead, take it away. I'm going to give you I'll give you the reins. And
alrighty, so then you click the screen or do I click the screen here?
I'm going to make you present it right now. There you go.
Alright, cool. Show my screen. Alright, hey
Awesome.
Everybody. My name's Ian Joyner, which I'm sure you guys have heard that a couple times while you've been waiting. Yeah, I'm one of the lead character artists at Legacy Effects. We used to be Stan Winston Studios, if you guys are familiar with the work done there. It's mostly practical effects. I started off in games doing actually more cinematics, really, working at Blur Studio, doing really, really cool, amazing things there that just was a great learning experience there and a great place to just kind of see all the assets that are involved in making a cinematic or a short film or anything of the sort. But my love was always really character design. But I focused so much on the 3D side that for a long time I kind of tried to figure out a way to blend the two worlds. And I went freelance after Blur and kind of kept trying to discover ways of I'll start doing I'll start doing some maquettes, just digital maquettes based on rougher concepts, and that worked for a while. And then I met my friend Scott Patton at Legacy, and he really showed me a way of letting go of process and really just embracing the tools for what they are. So I primarily these days just use Zbrush and Photoshop, with a little bit of other things thrown in the mix, but really these days almost 99% of my pipeline is just those. And everything from the really organic to the hard surface, if I have to get very precise, I will jump into 3D Studio Max or Modo, but it's less and less these days, and I focus more on the concept and less on the final asset. But the experience I got learning the process of making a final asset has made it kind of doable to do what I do nowadays. If I try to just jump into this as a beginner, I think it would not serve me very well. So I'm just going to talk for a little bit about kind of my process, mostly showing just personal projects or things that are not an NDA, and then we'll turn it over to you guys for some questions. So let's get started here. Oops. So this is some stuff from one of my classes that I teach in person, and it's kind of my workflow of work as well. What I like to do is oftentimes I'll rough out quick forms using Dynamesh. And in Photoshop, I'll draw on top of them, or sometimes I'll just do it in Photoshop, come up with some quick sketches before I commit to a real plan in ZBrush. One of the issues with doing character design in 3D is it's very easy to fall into past habits. It's very easy to fall into the idea that, oh, well, it's a 3D model, so I got to model every little piece of it. I got to detail everything, and my my little accessories have to look just right. But that's not really what the concept phase is when you do this. It's more about, does my form look good from all directions? Do I like the overall silhouette of the character? If that's the case, the detail is easy. If that's not the case, then you're just going to noodle over your models for days, as opposed to the schedules I have usually are a day to do a couple concepts. Fairly finished usually, but I'll show you a couple things that would fall into that category. So here you can see a couple of in-class demos I did of some quick Dynamesh sculpts and some paint overs on top of them. Some witches and some Bowser redesigns. I'm going to show some work in progress stuff I've done from that class, and it's all kind of based on 80s video games, so you'll see some of that. Also a bunch of classic monsters. So we were talking about Dynamesh, and this is just a very simple video I did for a demonstration in Brazil, I think it was, in October. And the process here is not going to be very glamorous, but the idea is kind of how I work on every character you're going to see. I almost always these days start from a sphere and using Dynamesh. I don't know how many are familiar with ZBrush. When we get to the Q&A, if you guys are like, what the heck are you talking about? Feel free to ask any of those questions. But Dynamesh is basically the closest I've seen to a digital clay. You start with whatever object you want, and you just turn it into a malleable form. And everything you put into it really comes from your head, or your heart, if you're like that kind of person who wants to say that. So I like to start with a sphere and just let the form kind of flow and look at it from all angles and really try to figure out the personality of the character. One of my shortcomings is I often will neglect things like hands or the lesser extremities that I know I'm not really going to try to sell a model with until the very, very end. So that was just a little giant I had started as a live demo, a couple minutes of modeling. I think it was like 15 minutes or 10 minutes or something. But the same process can be used for fully detailed characters, stuff with tons of accessories and little detail pieces all over them. Here's a work in progress character, as you can see by the little title at the bottom, that I was doing in one of my classes, and I still plan on finishing up. I was doing this as what I call a cowboy shot, which means I really am not focusing on the legs, really the hands, any of that part. I just wanted to show chest up kind of the character, and I was having fun with him, so I think I might actually revisit this and just completely finish him, turn him into whatever it's going to be. With something like this guy, I would actually like to turn him into maybe a game asset and possibly a 3D print. And one of the great things about technology where it is now is no matter what you're learning, it can be as simple as an image on a screen to show, hey, I think this can kind of work for a form, and you hand it off to a really good 3D modeler. Or you could say, you know what, I'm going to take this to a final point, I'm going to print out a 3D maquette of it. Or maybe I'm going to print out a life-size model. I mean, where I work, we actually do full puppets and giant animatronic creatures and all sorts of wonderful things, suits of all sorts. And the idea is the same. No matter if it's on the screen or if it's a 12-inch maquette or a 20-foot robot, it doesn't matter because it's all coming from the same asset. And you know that when you hand that off to the visual effects teams, they're working from the same asset to start with as well, and they're just going to refine it and make it even better. So it's one of the areas that I think 3D concepting is really strong in, is that once you have a design approved, there's no more translation. It's just improving from that point. As opposed to sometimes you get the more sketchy stuff from a 2D artist primarily, and some of the translation can get lost. Sometimes you'll see that where you see this beautiful concept, and the next thing you see is like, the model's there, but it's kind of soulless. So the trick is trying to find a way of blending the two worlds, and that's something I'm always trying to learn ways to do. Another shot of him. And this is something I just started in class a little bit ago, but I want to show you can do hard surface in multiple ways in ZBrush. Everything from retopping to just letting it be Dynamesh to using shells. This is very, very rough, so hopefully I'll have this thing wrapped up in the next couple weeks. But it's really kind of a twisted version of Mega Man, which could be pretty fun maybe when it's done. We'll see how it turns out. But a hard surface is something that people kind of look at in ZBrush and go, well, you can't really do it. And I do agree with that to a point. You can't do it like you could do it in Maya or Modo or Max or XSI, whatever your poison is. What you can do with it is really flesh out a form first. You can really get your silhouette, you can really get your breakups, you can get color breakups, you can really solve a lot of these issues in 3 dimensions before you go into one of these programs to model. We're seeing it more and more where guys who are just 2D artists who have learned ZBrush are handing off rough hard surface models. They might not be the greatest sculpture you've ever seen, but all the questions are answered from all angles. So it's something that I really encourage young artists to not stay away from, is to really embrace playing in the hard surface areas and realizing that these things, it doesn't have to be the perfect model. If it does, then you should learn all the 3D aspects that can make it. If you just know how to do the ZBrush, you're kind of limiting yourself in terms of being like, yeah, well, let me show you how this really needs to be. But if it's just a rough form, maybe you just take this into Photoshop and you do all your work on top of it in Photoshop. But you know that from every angle, you're going to have your basics are all going to line up. So we'll go over some more of those kind of guys in a second. Now here's another one, just taking something completely wild with Dynamesh and showing that just because it's a completely crazy model, that doesn't mean you can't still clean it up very quickly in ZBrush. This is just a Dynamesh sculpture. It's got, I think it's just one piece, other than the floating bits. I think the floating bits were a separate Dynamesh subtool. But I did retop it, and I did actually put UVs on it, and I did a whole bunch of stuff with it. We'll jump into the next shot, which is a final comp of it. I like to kind of go a little more on the cartoony side, so you'll notice a lot of my personal work is a little more on the whimsical or sometimes the more stylized side of things. It's just kind of, I guess that's my style. But you'll see if you look on my website, you can see some of the more finished pieces that are a little more in the realism world. So this is taking a model that we did in class, and I had re-UV'd it, added you retopped it, added UVs, did some color stuff, showed that you can jump into Photoshop just with the color. So I really embraced the pipeline of 3D as opposed to just being like, well, I only use ZBrush, so I guess that's all I can use. That's one of the things I think about this curriculum that's going to be great is that if an artist decides they want to be a concept artist, they still will know all the steps involved in being a 3D artist. They'll know how to retop. They'll know why to retop, which is a bigger question than how to. Like, why would you retop this thing? You go, well, look fine with Dynamesh Sculpt. That's true, but what if I wanted to pose it? It'd be very, very difficult. Especially those hard surface guys, it's nearly impossible to pose if they're just a Dynamesh Sculpt. But the tools are getting so simple now and so fast that if you know what you're doing, you can completely retop characters for concept, not for like, this is ready to go into a film, very, very quickly. It just takes, you know, depending on the complexity, it can take minutes to hours. But it's a pretty exciting world to be a 3D artist in right now. It's not, the technical side is falling away more and more, so long as you know how to embrace the parts that you need to know. So speaking of the technical side, as I was doing this character, I decided I really wanted to retop him. So you can see the middle image there is the final geometry. But he was so high res that I couldn't just run the Z-remesher on it and consider it a day. I had to decimate it first. And I've had students in the past who they'll do these great sculptures, and then they try to do anything with it, and it just fails every time because they don't know the technical side. They don't know how to quickly solve these problems. So my advice to any up-and-coming artists who are just falling in love with ZBrush, which is very easy to do, I'm quite smitten by it myself, is to really embrace the technical side. The art side is going to be more important no matter what. Even if you're just a sculptor who's translating designs, you still have to be an artist first, because technicians they're kind of going away in terms of the character modeling aspect. What is really important is your knowledge of anatomy, your knowledge of form, your knowledge of believable anatomy, which is kind of what I kind of harp on a lot. Which means you can break rules here and there depending on the character, so long as it looks believable. And you kind of have to know the rules before you can break them, the old saying goes. So here's a couple very, very fast designs I did for one of our 3D printing partners at Legacy. They wanted to kind of come up with a little character to use for their rollout of a piece of equipment, which I won't talk about because I don't know if it's officially announced yet. But they went with a different type of character, so I'll show these two. But these were very quick. I was able to batch these out in ZBrush completely. I used some greeble parts from online and some stuff that I had made in the past, and within a day, I think I had like 4 of these, but I'll just show 2 of them. The other 2 I didn't think were all that much fun, but I like these guys. They kind of have their own little flavor to them. But again, it's, you know, some Photoshop, some this and some that. You can see they're pretty sloppy. There's a lot of parts that are not quite connected in a way that makes sense, but it was enough for me to get the idea across, and if they liked it, I could then take this into the next zone. And speaking of that, you also have the organics. This was a demo I did for Nomen a number of years ago on one of their workshop weekends. Kind of still scratching the surface at this point of my workflow. I didn't really understand how much to put in the model, how much to paint. So it's still in this stage kind of discovering things. I mean, right now I'm still discovering things. It's always evolving. The workflow is always changing. I'm really focusing more on 2D these days because it's something I want to bring into the 3D. Because one of the things for a concept artist, if your models just look like 3D models, some people are fine with it, but I know a lot of myself and my friends and higher art directors will just look at that and they don't see a concept, they just see kind of a dead model. So trying to fuse life back into those 3D models can take a lot of doing sometimes, but it also sometimes it's about stripping away the detail. Sometimes it's about stripping away the focus of certain areas. You know, we spend so much time adding detail everywhere, and then we realize, like, oh, there's no focus anymore. It's all just everywhere is detailed. It's a really common flaw you see in people when they're first starting out. Another thing I did for class a little while ago, doing a little Harry Potter redesign. So I did a Death Eater, or the Mentor. Not for any movies or anything. It's just because I'm a fan and I'm a giant geek. So, yeah, there's Fenrir. So, you know, but all of the stuff you see, it's all the same kind of workflow. From the hard surface to the very organic to the maybe more staged shots. They're all, it's just, what do I need to model? What can I do in Photoshop? The hair on this guy. I didn't sculpt the hair on him. I just actually made a little piece and then in Photoshop added what it needed to have. if I was going to print this out as a model, I'd really want to sculpt that hair to look quite sculptural and very nice in that form, and it wouldn't be overly detailed. Maybe we put real hair on top of it. If I was going to send this off to become an actual asset for a model, I'd take all the hair off and do it all with a hair solution in a 3D program. So knowing what technologies to use and what techniques to use is a real part of the battle that I recommend everybody kind of expose themselves to as much of the pipeline as you can. And in this day and age, I don't think a person just does, oh, I just do games or I just do film. I think more and more you're going to see guys going, I do games and film, and I also make collectibles because 3D printing is now getting so affordable and so precise, which we'll go into a little bit of that in a moment. And this is very, very old, but I do have a breakdown of it from a print I did for him. Speaking of Harry Potter geek, this was my personal house elf. I never gave him a name, though. I think my wife gave him a name, and I don't remember what it was. So anyway, he's obviously not the nicest little fella. But I printed out a small maquette of him about 9 inches tall. And this is a way I use Zbrush to make keys. It's a little bit sloppy. You wouldn't want to hand this off to a factory somewhere to do. But if you had a skilled artisan who's working under a skilled model maker, they'd have no problem with these. Those little grooves you see there are actually because I didn't slice this, because this is back before Zbrush even had slices. I was literally grabbing just the high-res polygroups and disconnecting them and adding in simple keys, all in ZBrush. Actually, at this point, I might have done some Mac stuff just to collapse it all. So those little grooves then become a key in themselves. And by key, I mean those parts actually will lock together and become one. He's still not glued because I'm actually going to make a model kit out of him one day. I say that, and 20 years from now, I probably still won't be done with it, but one day I will do it. So you can see here all the parts that were involved. He's got his pens. Everything on there is, I apologize, someone just decided to make my dog. So anyway, as you can see here, there's all the different parts are all being keyed so that they can be mobile. My dog has something to say about this, so if you just give her a moment, she'll add some more to something. So once all these parts are molded, I'd be able to really easily cast these up and ship them all around the world. But there's a few problems I had on this guy that I wasn't thinking of in terms of his mouth. There's a lot of undercuts in there, so I'd actually have to pop his teeth out and regrow them. It'd be a whole thing, so hence the delay of actually making this guy. And there he is assembled. This is actually kind of a cheat because we have him lying down, so he's kind of standing on his head at this point. That's why the lighting looks so very strange. But if you look here, you can see all the... Oh, sorry guys about the dog, which is not super annoying too. But you can see all the pieces kind of put together. They're obviously not glued and completely fused on there, but we do put together things.
Do you have your own 3D printer, or like how do you?
At work we do. I'm buying a Makerbot, which we're about to talk about now. The Makerbots are kind of frowned upon a little bit because they're not as precise as something like a full model, which is something I also would like to get. I'm so sorry. Someone just made our doorbell right out of the dog is really wild. So anyway, the Makerbot is what I'm looking at because it's very affordable, and it's great for doing things if you know how to mold things, do clay presses, which means you can get a really pretty good version of your character done. And what I'm going to show you next, the images aren't the most flattering. They look like there's more grow lines than there are. It's actually an inconsistency in the material. But again, huge classic horror movie fan, so I did a little Count Orlok, and I printed him out. And if you look at this, you can see those lines going across his face, and you think those are big grow lines. They're actually not. It's an inconsistency in the material. There are grow lines on here, and you have to do some work on this to make it really work. The difference is, from that last one that you saw, which was hundreds and hundreds of dollars of material, maybe even $1,000 worth of material, versus this thing, which was, I believe, like $3 worth of material, you have to ask yourself what makes more sense. Like for this guy, if I was going to actually take him to the final level, I would take this, I'd have to do a lot of priming and work on him to make him just right, and I'd probably have to pop his teeth out because the more precise small parts really just don't work great on the Makerbot for this type of work. But they're getting better all the time, and I'm actually really interested to see what they do next. I'm also looking at those Form 1s because they're just...
That's interesting.
The detail I'm seeing is just unbelievable.
What size is that head?
It's about the size of a softball.
Oh, wow. That's actually
Yeah,
pretty big.
Yeah, it is. It's actually a pretty large size. And I believe it took 8 hours to grow that, as opposed to the other ones, which were, overnight, 15-hour grows. But yeah, these guys are pretty big.
Wow, that's awesome.
But all the form reads on these things really, really well. And even the detail. We were one of the guys at work, Jason Lopes, is in charge of all of our 3D printing. He's quite a genius, and he's really kind of tweaked these Makerbots and tweaked these machines to do stuff that a lot of people don't think they're capable of. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh yeah, here you go. You're like, oh, wow, I didn't think you could do that. So it's pretty fun having those resources to be able to pick their brains.
That's awesome. And where are you working at right now?
And it's not all bloodthirsty monsters. This was actually the wedding cake topper for my wife and I for our wedding. She just won't stop. Hey, can you guys give me just 1 second?
Sure.
I will be just literally 1 second. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry, Diego. I don't think he's going to kill the dog.
I'm laughing at that. I'm like, the poor dog. Alexandra, yes, we're recording. We're recording this, so we'll release it on our YouTube site. So no worries. We also were running a little late, so we'll probably be extending this.
Hey guys, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Welcome back.
Yeah, absolutely. We can extend for sure. I do apologize for that. The dog was going completely crazy. I don't know what was going on. So anyway, yeah, 3D print, not just horrific monsters. You can do very cute and things that make your family happy too. So the next thing we'll get into really quick here is just a little bit of process, and then we'll get into the question and answer portion. So again, Dynamesh Sculpts. You can see they're pretty sloppy. There's not much I can do with that in terms of posing this character or doing anything more than what I have here. And in fact, at one point I realized I didn't like the arm layout on this. And if it's just Dynamesh, I'd really have to strip it away and just add new things. So I realized I kind of want these little digging arms on here. So there's the change there. And once I was kind of happy with it, I said, okay, it's time to remesh this character. Now, this was done before, and I mean right before Zbrush introduced the Z remesher stuff, which is phenomenal. It does have some problems in terms of adding spirals and whatnot, which can be fought, but it's not always the best. Sorry, I just had to run through the house trying to calm the dog out. So anyway, yeah, this was actually done by hand for a very quick retop, but nowadays I can do it in just a click of a button, and it takes even less time. It's amazing. And then we projected the detail back onto it, and you can see here it's up to level 7 over there in ZBrush, and it's really got a lot of detail it needed for it to have, but to go into the next phase, which is going to be doing a comp with it to give it a little bit more personality.
Ian, can I ask you something? What is that thing's name? What do you
the
name?
Manta Pup.
Ah, so cute. I'm sorry. It's just the cutest thing.
No problem.
The Manta.
I am going to do a little 3D print to him too.
Oh really? Oh my god. Oh my god, that's so cute.
If you ever look at a manta ray upside down and you see their little faces.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me.
They're so adorable, and they're just such fun.
Oh my god.
So I kind of have to use that with the dog you guys all heard barking.
Yeah.
So, and there became the Manta Pup.
Oh, it's so
and
cute.
I put 4 eyes on it because it's an alien. So it makes yes, the most creative decision you could ever make. Give it more limbs and give it more eyes, right?
Yes.
But it works, hopefully. So then the next phase would be PolyPaint, which if you guys aren't familiar with ZBrush, I'll just kind of describe it like this. It is a way of airbrushing. You don't have layers. You don't have all the cool 3D power that you have in something like even Mudbox or Mari or whatever it is. Yes, that's how out of it I am right now. But what I do like about the ability in Zbrush to just paint on something is like painting with an airbrush. There's no like cheating happening. It's just what are your color choices and how do you want to add focus to things? Do you want to deepen the crevices? Do you want to add dirt into them? It's just it's a one-pass thing, which is kind of fun as an artist. It's also kind of crappy as an artist when the client goes, yeah, that's great, but it'd be cool if they had, oh, I don't know, if they were red and they had black stripes on them. And, oh, well, I painted all this already. So what I do is I actually UV these characters. So I can do a PolyPaint, export it to a texture map, and just save it. And if they decide they want to do something completely different with it, it's really no big deal. It just means I'm going to repaint it. And watching the guys who traditionally paint has been a really big influence on me, and seeing how they kind of bring life to these characters that these silicones and foams and things, and all of a sudden it looks like it's really there. So how does that actually happen? So studying traditional methods. Same with sculpting. I do recommend anybody who's going to take these classes, anybody who's going to want to be a 3D artist, grab some clay and just sculpt. Learn form through that, and you will see your work improve night and day. It's amazing how much I feel I've grown in the past 5 years being there, just because I got motivated to really go back to clay, really go back to the traditional methods. And when you come back to the digital stuff, which does a lot of problem solving for you, it just lets you focus on the art as opposed to, I don't know what this should look like, and I don't really understand this or that. And once you kind of have that in your head, now it's just a matter of what buttons do I press. And those change every year. With Zbrush, it changes every update. You don't know what they're going to switch on you, and you go, oh, okay, well, I've got to adapt to that. So I'm going to jump forward here. A little close-up on him. You can see some of the detailing and some of the PolyPaint going on in there. And there's the final shot of him all painted up. And there he is spinning, and he's stopped right there. He's mooning us. So there we go. And then lastly, it comes into taking these models and turning them into a little piece of art that you're going to present to the client. Because if you just show a 3D model, it's not always the most inviting thing. Sometimes it looks a little dead. So one of the things I really love doing is actually taking these characters and making little scenes for them and just having some fun. So here you can see some of the basic passes I use on this character. Nothing really fancy. People always ask, like, oh, well, how did you get that? How did you get this? 90% of the time it's like I painted it and faked it. But a couple things I always use. The base material, the base render, which is up top left. Then a color pass, completely devoid of any kind of shadow, just so I can pull that color back in. Because sometimes when you start layering these things, they go away. The next is the Z-depth path, which is just what's closest to camera, what's farthest. A shadow pass, which honestly this shadow is a little harsh, so in the final I softened it a bit. A rim light pass, which is just done by moving a light behind in Zbrush and rendering. And then finally some sort of reflection pass. And sometimes I'll have multiples of these or a couple of versions of these, but really I almost strip all of that away and I end up with what you see right here. Sometimes I'll do a fancy pass on something if it needs a certain look, but for the most part, it almost always is what you see right here is the basic of everything.
Do you do all those passes in Zbrush, or
and then a little background in it?
Do you do them in
Yep, that's all Zbrush.
Okay, cool.
No, I do everything in Zbrush. Yeah, I really, one of the great things lately is I've been able to stay in 2 applications almost exclusively.
Wow.
Just Photoshop and Zbrush all day.
Nice.
And ZBrush is like sketching in 3D.
Mm-hmm.
And then Photoshop is like painting on a computer. So you put them together and they're just they're a match made in heaven. I just really love them together. And one question I'm sure will probably maybe come up is about Keyshot. Yeah, we're using it. I do like it. I think it's got some really cool abilities. One problem I have with Keyshot is it kind of deadens a lot of your stuff. It really looks like product. It doesn't look alive. Even if you put the cool skin shaders and everything on there, it's a little too glossy. So some of the stuff I see out of Keyshot I like the most has a lot of work done to it afterward. But boy, the shadows and reflections are just gorgeous. They're really hard to fight. So yeah, very simple, kind of swishy looking background there. Mostly painting, a couple photograph pictures on there. This was for a book, so I tried to just use stuff that I had. And then there he is all comped together.
Oh my god! He's so cute.
That's not my dog. It's me.
It makes me so happy. I love him.
And he's that was kind of one of the things on this character was when we were doing the book Essence of Creature Design. It was myself and a bunch of other just phenomenal artists doing really cool stuff. But one of the things we kept noticing was how often it was like, oh, it's a bloodthirsty fey monster, and oh, that one's a big bloodthirsty brute, and that one's a, everything was just kind of mean and vicious and stuff. And I was like, you know what? Creatures are cute sometimes. Why not make one? So that's why I made this one.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah. Do you want to open it up to the Q&A? I know we're kind of running super late today. So.
Yeah. So we do have a few questions, and for those of you out there that want to ask Ian anything, now's the time. I marked a few of them down, so let me find, there's one. So one of them was, let's see, is there project different? Oh, what are the differences basically between working for games and working for movies? And do you do a lot of game work? I don't know if you actually do or not.
Well, yeah, I used to do a lot of game work. I focus more onto the concept art side. So these days, I still do a little bit now and again, but it's been a few years since I've done any game concepting. I've really been pretty much working legacy hours, and it's kind of filled my schedule. But in terms of the differences, I have actually worked game cinematics and practical effects now, and the differences are really minor. They're mostly about your end result. The beginning is all the same.
Okay, cool.
The beginning is always the same, and one of the things that you'll find is like a great character is a great character is a great character. So if you have a really well sculpted character and you've added a lot of really cool details to it and a lot of cool accessories, and if you're going to do it for games, you have to know what your limits are. So what are the limits in games are going to be? Polygon counts, obviously, or how would you achieve hair? How would you achieve the tattered cloth? How would you achieve the things that maybe would not be as difficult to do on a live action thing where you're actually going to, well, it's still difficult, but you're actually going to put real hair on there or you're going to put real cloth on there. Or if you're doing cinematics, you're going to take these characters and actually do simulations of those things. So what it comes down to is once the concept's finished or once the model is finished is what is the end result going to be. So if you're designing a character for a game, you have to know, like, well, I can't go super crazy with it because maybe there's a rig that I have to adhere to. And if I go too crazy with my model and suddenly I added weird proportions and all this, and they go, well, we're stuck to this human character rig. We can elongate certain proportions, but that's as far as we can go. It's like, oh, but I added a third head to them. Well, you can't do that. So you have to know those kind of limits. But in terms of just the art side, it really just comes down to what is best for the client. What are they going to need to see, and then trying to achieve it to the best of your ability.
Awesome. And I have another question here. So someone's asking about the turnaround time. How fast can you go from, the concept to completion with your characters?
That's a good question. That oftentimes depends on the client. When I do my like this guy here, he was sculpted in a couple hours, retop the whole thing, and then I probably spent, all in all, I probably spent a day on this whole thing from concept to this final piece.
That's awesome.
That's the usual go-round for the first thing on a character.
Cool.
What I'll sometimes do is I'll spend a day, like let's say I have a project and there's multiple characters, and they don't just want to see model shots. They want to see a full, something like you're seeing on the screen right now.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do is I would take and I've got maybe 3 days to do it. So I would take one day and just sculpt as many ideas as I have. And they could be crappy, ugly sculpts that I would never show another living being. But the idea would be one of them might spark something, and maybe I'll work a little bit more on it. So maybe on that day I get 3 or 4 done. It doesn't, not really counting, but maybe it's something along those lines.
Right.
Or if I've got one that I'm like, oh, this is really great, this is what they're going to like, maybe I'll spend more time on that and then just do another couple on it.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, I'll go back to it, look at it, and go, okay, so these ones were cool, these ones are crap. I will refine these cool ones and get them to as far as I can get them in the day. And then the final day, maybe there's 2 characters I'm going to try to end up with. I'll do comps like you see here and put together some different images of these characters. And the end result of that is going to be that you have like 2 pieces that are really polished, then you're going to have a couple model shots you could show of those polished pieces. Then you're going to have some variation models you could show to say, well, I also was thinking about these. And one of the things I like to do with that is I'll do just like you saw at the beginning of this presentation. I'll do this kind of level of stuff, a quick little paint over on it, and say, hey, maybe this could be a direction or this could be a direction. It's not as polished, but maybe if the client just hates what you were doing and they see something in the one that you didn't like, then at least you had something there.
Yeah.
And by the end of all of that, you've got the ability to then go and show turntables of the rough ones if you really wanted to. And then once that's all done, you have a lot of work to show at the end of the week. So that's kind of the workflow I go with. So it's usually like one day for a good sculpt and one day for a good comp, but oftentimes that becomes split. So you get one day for some okay sculpts and one day for a couple okay comps. So
sweet.
But the flip side of that is when you get to a final character like this guy.
That guy is so cool.
Final result was months of work, and not just on my hand. There were many companies involved in the final creation of this guy.
Wow.
I was lucky enough to be able to come in toward the end and be involved in the beginning to give some pitch ideas, and then came back full circle to kind of work on blending the actor into it, working on the anatomy, and doing all the different scale passes. And I spent about 4 months probably just doing different scale passes, all hand sculpted, because they wanted this very unique kind of look.
That's incredible.
So once we got to the body, I made a bunch of alphas. But so a character like this could be, I was on this thing for off and on it, but it was months of work to get to the final.
Well, it looks amazing. It's one of my favorites of yours.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's really awesome. So how much RAM do you have on your computer for this kind of high detail sculpting?
I have a gigaflop of RAM.
A gigaflop?
What do I have? I'm actually, almost everything you see here I've been doing on my laptop these days.
Oh, wow.
I have a Pro, one of the new ones, I guess.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
16 gigs, I think, in this one.
That's a strong little machine.
They're great. They're
wow.
really great. I actually I have an old tower at work, an older tower at work, that has 32 gigs in it, but my laptop outperforms it. So lately I've been doing more work on my laptop than I have on my on the big box at work, just because it's able to crunch a lot more polygons. But I think part of the reason RAM doesn't matter to me is Zbrush is a 32-bit application, so it can only use what it can use. And Photoshop is, Photoshop, so it's
right.
More better, but really after probably like 16, you're not really seeing any difference. Really
yeah.
After. The biggest change for me, though, is having more RAM, is just that I can keep all my applications open at once.
That's
the difference I see.
So I have another quick question. Someone's asking, let's see, does your model appear in the final movie, or do you make a new model specifically for animation and compositing?
The model doesn't really appear in the movie. Generally what will happen is, like, let's say something like an Iron Man character. I will do the model that would become the physical prints, maybe, right? They would do 3D prints of these things, additive manufacturing, and make these cool suits. So would you call that the model appearing in the movie? Well, there's so much work that goes into those printed pieces, I wouldn't really say that. The maquettes are pretty much one-for-one for what we do. But then it comes into stuff like, and sometimes for the makeups, we'll be able to do really detailed prints as well. But when it comes to like something like sending a model over to ILM or sending it to Digital Domain or one of these companies, they have a lot of work involved in getting them into a functioning thing for their pipeline. I don't do models that are like, and this has all the UV sets that you're going to need. I do nice clean UV sets for what I need it to be. The good thing is most of the questions are answered, so once they have it, they can go, oh, okay, I get it. But then they have to go in and make all that micro-level detail stuff that I just never really have to touch. And then they have to look at the topology and go, well, this isn't going to animate the way we want it to, so they might have to retop it. I do retop for sculpting to make sure I get the detail I want. Then these guys have to make retop for animation. They have to make retop for any kind of deformation functions they need to have.
Right.
So once it's handed off, there's still a lot of work involved in those guys. But the good news is, structurally, a lot of times you don't see the difference in terms of just visual. It's the underlying stuff that you do. So the answer is yes and no, I guess.
Awesome.
But I know that those guys have a lot of work to do once they get even the nicest model that we've ever handed off. And
Yeah.
so much.
I can imagine. It's good. It's going through so many different types of pipelines, and it has to, you know, it has to be flexible.
Absolutely, and it's different for every team. You know, one team will be. The one thing that we've been pretty good about is when it comes to animatics, our workflow works really well when you're working with somebody who goes, "Well, how does that animate?" And you go, "Well, here's the model," and they'll decimate it, slice it up, put some nasty texture on it, and you know, it'll look like a block man walking around, but it will have the proportions and the basic structure that you've given them. And they can start testing it out and like, oh, this thing walks well, or ooh, these limbs are way too long.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes, you know, you're able to kind of jump into this next phase of the project pretty quickly. Sometimes while you're still designing the character, we can have that happen multiple times.
Well, that's incredible. Would you say that Zbrush is the standard for like character and creature creations these days?
I would. You know, you could say Mudbox is awesome, and it is awesome. I haven't really used it for a long time, but it's a great program. But Zbrush is a little different. Zbrush is the standard, I think, for the artist side. Like when it comes to, I just want to make a cool creature, and I want to sculpt it, or I want to make a cool suit, and I want to sculpt it, and I'm going to put some paints on it, and I'm going to do whatever. Then I would say Zbrush is absolutely the standard. But when it comes to pipeline stuff, Zbrush kind of falls down a little bit. It's not really integrated. If you look at Mudbox, it really works well with the Autodesk suite, which is now pretty much everything. They are able to like really use these digital sculpting tools and also make them functional for their actual pipeline. Which Zbrush, you know, it works to a level, and I know a lot of places do use it quite extensively, but that's the one area that I think that I wouldn't quite say it's the standard. It's just kind of, it's great for the character creation, though, I'll tell you that much. I've tried every other program out there, and I just absolutely love sculpting in ZBrush. It's just a very intuitive program to me.
Yeah, it is super intuitive. They have a lot of amazing tools in it that it's really hard to find anywhere else. It's just like, and also like their brush algorithms are just insane. Like, I can't get the same, like, for me, I can't get the same feedback with other programs like Sculptress and Mudbox than I can with ZBrush. Like, it's just...
It's responsive. And I think for me, if there's a delay on anything, I get so frustrated. So when you have a program that just works and it's super responsive, it's like, oh, this is great. You know, I click on it and it does what I expected it to do.
Right, yeah.
That's why I think with Dynamesh, too, is people try to use it until the very end and then just go, why? As soon as you get past, like, 256 on the levels, it's so slow. So just remesh it, retop it really quickly, because you're already done with your structure at that point, and then go to town detailing it. It's great, but people get afraid of the technical side, I guess. So.
Yeah. So I want to ask one more question. Someone has a pretty good question. What are the studios looking to see in a character artist? So he's just basically, you know, like what is the expectation these days of studios looking for this type of employee?
That's a good question, and it's something that I think people, you know, they're always looking for that trick, right? Like, what is an art director looking for? And you know, you always hear that. Well, just don't do the big-breasted cyber lady, and don't do an orc because no one wants to see that. Well, truthfully, I've seen people get hired with really good versions of those things. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the thing, is if it's a really good version of a cliched idea, guess what? Go look at your game shelves and go look at your movie theaters. Cliche is in.
Right.
If you go and do something super, look how original I am, and I've done this great thing, mm-hmm. I might look at it and go, wow, that's really cool. But studio heads might look at it and go, ooh, whoa, 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 whoa. I mean, I've had so many times where we've gone into things and they say, we want to see a mermaid like we've never seen before. We want to see a, you know, this whatever creature like we've never seen before. And then you go, great. And you go off and you and your team come up with all these crazy ideas and you bring it in and they go, whoa, what is that?
Yeah.
I've never seen that before. And you go, oh, okay, so you want the traditional thing. Okay, cool. Yeah, but make it have punk rock here. Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So the answer to that question, I think, is basically this. A strong artistic sense and beyond all that, having good taste, mm-hmm. which is not something that can easily be taught. It's something that you learn yourself. If you have good taste, though, you can take something terrible and make it amazing, and you can take something that's a cool idea and make it even better. If you don't have taste, you can take the coolest idea in the world and you'll end up with something that no one wants to see. And the only way you really get that is submitting your work to people, both, not even just work though, like going in and showing stuff on forums, going to other students and saying, what do you think about this? Talking to your friends about why does this work and this not work. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with my friends about why do I hate some certain design in a movie or why do I love some other design in a movie. And you start kind of picking it apart and figuring out like, oh, that is really cool. Like the fact that I expected it to be this and it was really this other thing. It really changes the way you kind of, you start dissecting everything. And that's kind of how I think taste starts to develop, is you start really finding out what are the flavors that go into this? Like what makes this work? Oh, it's the little sparkle in the eye here, and it's the way that he has this kind of attitude about him that's really great. Or I love the fact that like they use one predominant color through this entire design, and then they broke it right here, and suddenly it just is a great looking thing. And then you can look at something else and go, and why doesn't this work? It's got all the detail I can imagine. It's got beautiful, beautiful work put into it, but it just is cool. Why isn't it cool? And then you start going through that and going, oh, because this is overdone, or there's no area of rest. There's no chance for me to just take a break and go, oh, wow, I love the face, but no, the body's really in detail too. Oh, and the arm is really, oh, God. And you get overwhelmed by something. You realize, like, oh, well, I don't want to do that. So you start to kind of whittle all that down. So the studios are really looking for somebody who can do that, could show the most original, crazy design, and then right next to it show something that they would expect to see in their movie or in their game. Right. And then they realize, oh, this guy's got both. He can actually do weird stuff, which is cool for the artists, and he can do what we're actually going to pick. So that's a long-winded answer to that question.
It's a good answer, though. It's very straightforward. So, Ian, do you have time for a couple more questions, or what?
Absolutely.
Do you have to run?
Yes,
okay, cool.
I'll probably get like 15 minutes. So
great. Okay, that sounds good. So someone's asking, how much time do you spend studying like references and gathering material before actually designing something for a client?
So that is a good question. Pretty much all of my time is being spent gathering references and stuff. Generally, by the time that a project comes to me, I spent so much time. I mean, I spend every night, like lately I've been really into the 2D side. So I've been painting, I've been drawing, I've been just really kind of getting back to the stuff that I've neglected for the past almost 13 years. And I'm really just jumping back into it, realizing, like, why did I stop doing this? So I'm studying old masters, I'm studying anatomy, I'm studying all the stuff that, some people I've actually had them say, like, well, don't you know that already? It's like, no, I don't know that at all. No one really knows all this stuff. You always learn something when you study. So I'm constantly studying. Every time I see something cool online, saving it to my hard drive, I'm pinning it on Pinterest. I'm, if somebody else has some cool piece of artwork, I'm saving it away. I might never even look at those things again, but just by the act of saving them and filing them away, they're kind of in my mental bank. And then all of a sudden, a client will come in and say, we need this whatever dragon monster, blah, blah, blah. And you go, no, I saw this weird deformed creature that was, actually like a malformed version of a dingo or something. And you realize that could be a really cool dragon if you strip away this and this and that. And it's like a completely nothing to do with a reptile, but all of a sudden you realize that there was a great design beat in this image you saw. And that inspires you to go off and do something. So in terms of how much time do I spend? Pretty much all my free time and even some of my working time. I'm just constantly, if I take a break, I'm almost always observing something else, taking a picture of something else, or looking through a book. I have way too many books. I just constantly buy them. They sit on my shelf for a long time. I'm like, oh, look at that. That's pretty cool.
That's awesome. No, it's interesting that you say that, because I think a lot of people, a lot of artists, I think, do that, and it's good and healthy. So another question. Let's see. Do you have any personal favorite creatures that you designed or that you were a part of that you really were impressed to see come to life?
Oh boy, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
There is some stuff coming down the pipe that I can't talk about.
Oh.
That way about. But I can't say anything because I would be tarred and feathered and thrown out of the industry, so I don't want to have that happen.
Okay, yeah.
Usually, almost every project we get to work on has a little bit of that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there is nothing like seeing your stuff come to life. If you work on something for months or years and all of a sudden you get to go see it in a game or see it in a movie theater, it's the whole reason we kind of do this stuff. Even this guy you see up on my screen right now, you know, he started off as kind of a fun little illustration. Actually started off as a doodle that I did in my sketchbook, and then all of a sudden I was like, yeah, I want to make this guy. And I've got him sitting in parts on my desk, but it's one of those things, just seeing him in 3 dimensions on my desk, it's like, you know, that's a really cool thing. So in terms of like a favorite creature I've worked on, generally I kind of hate everything I've done in the past, and I'm always looking to the future like, oh, that one was neat. And by the time it comes out, I'll be like, oh, I didn't like that one anyway. So but this thing I'm doing now is neat. You get kind of, you're always looking forward, I guess.
That's good.
But all of them in the past, you know, it's all a learning experience, and all stories on everything, you know. You always have these, like, one of the things I'm lucky about is I often get to go to set and work on things. You know what? I actually do have an answer to that question. I do. 80s Robot from the Muppets. I got to work on that, got to meet the team early on. They really wanted it to be like in one of these old 70s robots. They actually got the rights to it so they could make sure that there was no legalese problems.
Wow.
And then I got to add this design to this character. And then I got to go to set and puppeteer the character. And I am a huge Muppets fan. And to walk around the actual Muppets theater that was recreated and be able to see all of the characters I grew up with just there and look and see, you know, Statler and Waldorf up in the balcony and watching everybody do the Muppets song, it was just, to me, that was actually probably the highlight of my short career so far. It was amazing.
That's awesome. Wow, that's amazing.
Any other questions?
Let's see. I think that's pretty much it. There's one person that's asking, how are you introduced to the sculpting side of designing characters, and what, I mean, were you sculpting it like with clay or just pen and paper? Like what got you into ZBrush? Yeah,
when I first started in the whole art stuff, I mostly was doing illustration for album covers, and I did graphic design. And before that, when I was in school, I always sculpted. And they were pretty terrible. I never really had instruction. I just loved sculpting. When I was a really little kid, I had a body cast because I had something called hip dysplasia. And my favorite toy was my little clay table, and I had this little polymer clay that I would just play with all day. And so that kind of started a love of like 3-dimensional, whatever you want to call it. And I kept making characters out of tin foil and paper towels and whatever else you could find. Then I started painting up my other action figures and reassembling them and casting little sculpting pieces on them and doing all sorts of things. Flash forward into school, and I started actually sculpting little maquettes. And I was completely self-taught at that point. It was just, like I said, they were pretty awful, but really, really loved it. And then realized I had to make money because otherwise I couldn't live. So I got into graphic design, and my boss at the time knew I loved 3D, but I'd never touched it. And so he bought a seat of Maya for a project. And the whole idea was on one side of the cover they wanted like Da Vinci-esque illustrations, so I did all those. And then on the other side they wanted very like polygonal, strange heads and frogs and all this weird stuff. So I got to actually learn 3D and do a job, and I really liked it. It was quite fun. It was kind of like earlier on I had started to learn some 3D, and I hated it. I really just, it was so technical, and I started learning like 3D modeling, and I think the first class I had, it was a Ringling, and it was a CAD class. And I'm like, oh my god, this is awful. Just hated it. And then I started seeing these videos of Bay Rate and Martin Kroll doing stuff in Mirai, I think it was. And
Mirai?
was blown away by the work they were doing. It looked kind of like they were sketching in 3D, but it was all polygon by polygon at that point. But it was still like these lines were coming out, and they were making form and making character by the end of it. I really loved that. So I got involved in that, and then to get involved in ZBrush, I started being friendly with all these guys. And we started things where we did speed sculpting challenges. And it would basically be, before ZBrush, that you'd say, you got an hour, what can you make? And we'd run the lunch crunch idea, basically. And we would just go crazy. And this is, I was actually unemployed at the time. Basically, I was mowing lawns. And I just had fallen in love with 3D at that point. And so what I was doing was I would mow lawns and cut trims, hedges, and all that stuff, and then come home and I would just watch Newman videos all night long, and I would chat online on IRC with other nerds like myself, and just be like, oh man, how did you do this? And watch this video over there. This is before YouTube and all that stuff, so it was kind of finding this information was pretty difficult. So anyway, yeah, like I said, very much on the technical side. As I'm doing this, one of my friends got onto the beta testing for Zbrush, and he invited me to partake, and I got to meet Jaime, and I got to meet all these guys on the phone. And at that point, Leto was just starting to work on stuff, and sorry, I've got crazy stuff happening out here. Yeah, so anyway, they invited me to join the beta for Zbrush, and I just fell in love. And this is way dated when you compare it to what Zbrush is actually capable of now. It was the ability to have subtools didn't even exist. The ability to, I don't even think polypainting existed at that point. They were calling it 2.5D because they really weren't even sure what it was. And then with involvement, it became this just amazing program. And and then it continued to just develop into this just unbelievable tool for artists. But I was hooked right away. I got my job at Blur, and I was telling them about Zbrush, and I brought it in and kind of was showing some artists there. And it really, all people could see it for was a tool for doing detail. Oops, sorry, wrong one. There it is. Oops, it doesn't crash. It was a tool for doing detail, and then it was like, no, you could really do a lot more with it. But at the time, to retaught them to do all this, it was a lot more involved, and there weren't the tools that we have now. So it took many years before it was like I saw it for. I always kind of felt like it was this tool for what I use it for now, but it took a long time to really kind of come to fruition. But yeah, that was kind of that's my introduction to Zbrush, was getting onto the beta really, really early.
Yeah.
And just being blown away by what's capable.
Man, that's crazy. I don't think I know anybody that was on the beta, so that's pretty impressive. So cool. Well, thank you so much, Ian. Is your cat attacking you now?
No, I just aged dramatically.
Oh. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think we're good. We're gonna call it. And if you have any last things that you want to say, go ahead and do it. But thank you so much, and thank you guys for being hardcore and sticking with us.
Thank you guys for sticking it out. Sorry for the technical difficulties in the beginning, and I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves, and hope I didn't make too big an ass out of myself.
No. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys too. Thank you, audience.